CIA documents mentioning Hitler in Argentina just got declassified, and the internet is going wild. Could one of history's greatest villains have escaped his Berlin bunker and lived out his days in South America? In this video, we're opening a secret vault of history as we examine exactly what these documents say and the significance of President Milei's recent announcement. We'll guide you through this historical puzzle piece by piece, revealing why this story has captivated thousands who are now questioning the official narrative about Hitler's fate. You'll discover the fascinating intersection between documented evidence and popular conspiracy theories. The truth behind these declassified files will leave you stunned. The explosive announcement. President Javier Milei's announcement sent shockwaves through historical research communities last month. Argentina will now declassify all government documents related to Nazi fugitives who settled in the country after World War II. This opens potentially thousands of previously unseen records that could reshape our understanding of one of history's darkest chapters. Let's break down what Milei actually promised. Through his chief of cabinet Guillermo Francos, Milei ordered the complete release of archives, specifically detailing how Nazi war criminals escaped to Argentina. The scope extends beyond immigration records to include banking and financial transaction documents, along with classified defense ministry records that researchers have never had access to before. The announcement highlighted Ratlines, the escape routes used by thousands of Nazis fleeing Europe after the Holocaust. These were organized networks that helped war criminals obtain false identities, secure travel documents, and establish new lives in countries like Argentina. This declassification could finally expose exactly how these networks operated and who facilitated them. This immediate connection to Hitler conspiracy theories stems from Argentina's well-documented history as a Nazi haven. Between 5,000 and 10,000 Nazis and fascist war criminals escaped to Argentina after World War II, creating fertile ground for more extreme theories about Hitler himself. Within hours of Milei's announcement, social media exploded with wild speculation. The most persistent conspiracy theory centered on Adolf Hitler's fate. On Twitter, user A History Revealed posted a grainy black and white photo claiming to show Hitler and Eva Braun in Bariloche, 1953, that garnered over 50,000 retweets. On TikTok, videos under Jung Hitler in Argentina accumulated millions of views, with one creator dramatically claiming the government wouldn't be releasing these files if they didn't contain proof Hitler lived in Argentina until the 1960s. The mention of financial documents particularly ignited online speculation. A viral Facebook post claimed, "Follow the money and you'll find Hitler lived comfortably in Argentina until the 1960s. These theories spread despite overwhelming evidence confirming Hitler's suicide in Berlin, because they offer a tantalizing alternative to established history. What's particularly intriguing is that one document reportedly contains coordinates to a remote property in Patagonia that may have housed multiple high-ranking Nazi officials, potentially revealing connections previously unknown to historians. The declassification followed significant pressure from U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, who's been investigating Nazi-linked bank accounts, particularly those connected to Credit Suisse. In October 2023, Grassley sent a letter to the Argentine government requesting access to records that might illuminate how Nazi assets were transferred to foreign accounts. This connection suggests the documents may reveal far more about the economic underpinnings of Nazi escapes than sensational Hitler conspiracies. The anticipation surrounding these records is justified. They could answer questions historians have pursued for decades. How extensively was the Argentine state involved in sheltering Nazis? Which financial institutions handled stolen Nazi assets? How many war criminals reached Argentina, and who helped them? The potential revelations extend beyond Argentina's borders and could implicate institutions across Europe and the Americas. Milei's decision marks a dramatic shift from decades of secrecy surrounding Argentina's Nazi connections. Under Juan Perón's presidency from 1946 to 1955, Argentina actively welcomed Nazi fugitives, viewing them as valuable anti-communist allies. and technical experts. Subsequent governments were reluctant to fully address this history, making the current commitment to transparency historically significant. These newly accessible documents could expose entire networks of collaborators. This includes Argentine officials, international banking executives, religious figures, intelligence operatives, and government officials from multiple countries who facilitated these escapes. The Defense Ministry files might reveal military involvement in protecting or recruiting Nazi fugitives for their technical expertise. However, these documents almost certainly won't contain evidence that Hitler escaped Berlin. Despite persistent theories, the historical record on Hitler's death is clear. Multiple witnesses testified to his suicide. Soviet forces recovered and identified partial remains, and Hitler's dental records provided confirmation. Modern forensic analysis has strengthened this conclusion. The Hitler in Argentina theory frustrates historians because it overshadows the very real history of Nazi escapes. While Hitler died in Berlin, men like Adolf Eichmann, Josef Mengele, and thousands of other war criminals did escape justice by fleeing to Argentina. Their confirmed stories represent the actual historical scandal, deserving attention. The declassified documents will provide unprecedented insight into how these Nazi fugitives escaped, who helped them, and how they established new lives. They'll expose financial networks that allowed stolen wealth to fund these escapes, and new identities, potentially identifying previously unknown war criminals who successfully hid in Argentina. For Argentina, this declassification represents a significant step in confronting its complicated historical role. By opening these archives, the country acknowledges its part in sheltering war criminals and commits to transparency, aligning with similar efforts in other countries to confront difficult chapters in their pasts. Organizations like the Wiesenthal Center have sought these records for decades, hoping they would help bring remaining Nazi war criminals to justice and provide closure for Holocaust survivors and their families. While most high-ranking Nazis who escaped to Argentina have died, the documents hold immense historical value, representing a reckoning with the past. The CIA's secret hunt, the intelligence community's dirty little secret, isn't just what they know, it's what they didn't know, for certain. While social media buzzed about Argentina's upcoming document release, most missed an equally fascinating historical footnote. The Central Intelligence Agency was still actively investigating reports of Hitler in South America, nearly a decade after his supposed death in Berlin. These were documented intelligence inquiries that reached the highest levels of America's spy agencies. In 1955, with the war a full decade in the rearview mirror, CIA agents found themselves examining a curious report from Colombia. The world had long accepted Hitler's suicide in his Berlin bunker as historical fact, but America's premier intelligence agency maintained lingering doubts. They collected testimony, photographs, and detailed accounts suggesting the Führer might have escaped justice after all. What makes this particularly interesting is how thoroughly the CIA documented these investigations. Their methodology involved cross-referencing witness statements, analyzing photographic evidence, and dispatching field agents to verify locations mentioned in reports. The investigations generated substantial paperwork, prompted follow-ups, and made their way up the intelligence chain of command. These documents have recently resurfaced in public discourse, creating quite a stir on social media. Users across platforms have shared images of CIA files that appear to track Hitler's movements through South America years after his reported death. The files contain detailed descriptions of alleged Hitler sightings, complete with physical descriptions and information about his supposed living situations. However, these documents were declassified back in 2017 during the initial opening of the JFK assassination files under then-President Donald Trump. What specifically did these files contain? For one, there were detailed reports from informants claiming to have seen Hitler in person, long after the war's end. These weren't vague second-hand accounts, but specific descriptions from individuals claiming direct contact. The level of detail makes for compelling reading. Specific locations, physical descriptions, and contextual information that at first glance seems to lend credibility to the impossible. One document stands out in particular. It details information from a former SS soldier who claimed to have regular monthly meetings with Hitler in Colombia. The informant, identified in the files as Philip Citroen, provided what appeared to be credible first-hand testimony. According to the declassified report, he had met with a man he identified as Hitler about once a month in Colombia. What made this report particularly striking was that it included photographic evidence. The document contains a photograph showing Citroen standing alongside a man he claimed was Adolf Hitler. The image shows two men in what appears to be a casual setting, adding a layer of apparent credibility to the claims. This tangible evidence gave intelligence analysts something concrete to examine. The reports moved up the intelligence hierarchy, suggesting that at least some CIA officials took them seriously enough to warrant further investigation. When we consider the chaotic aftermath of World War II and the thousands of Nazi officials who successfully escaped to South America, these investigations make a certain kind of sense. If Eichmann and Mengele could escape, why not Hitler himself? However, despite documenting these claims in detail, the CIA maintained significant skepticism. The opening line of the declassified document specifically states that neither the agent who sent the report nor the one who wrote it could assess the authenticity of the information being relayed. This crucial caveat appears right at the start, though it's often cropped out of social media shares. Another declassified report explicitly recommended that the entire matter should be dropped. After sending agents to follow up on reported sightings and finding inconsistencies in witness testimony, the CIA concluded they were dealing with unreliable information. This systematic approach, document everything, investigate thoroughly then assess critically, represents standard intelligence methodology rather than evidence of Hitler's survival. What's particularly revealing about these documents is how they highlight the complex moral landscape of post-war intelligence operations. While investigating potential Hitler sightings, the CIA was simultaneously recruiting other Nazi figures for their own purposes. Take Klaus Barbie, the notorious Gestapo chief in Lyon, France. Declassified files reveal that the CIA recruited him as an agent to assist with anti-communist efforts. They later smuggled him to Bolivia, where he continued intelligence work, including instructing the military regime on torture and interrogation techniques. This pragmatic approach to former Nazis, hunting some while recruiting others, illustrates the morally ambiguous choices intelligence agencies made during the Cold War era. The fight against communism led to alliances with figures who might otherwise have faced justice for war crimes. The CIA's investigations into Hitler sightings also reveal something about how intelligence work actually functions. Intelligence agencies document and investigate improbable reports to rule them out conclusively. This thoroughness creates documentary evidence that can later fuel conspiracy theories. The very existence of these files, regardless of their skeptical conclusions, becomes proof in the eyes of conspiracy theorists. These documents highlight how intelligence agencies operate in a landscape of uncertainty. Even a decade after Hitler's death, when the historical consensus was firmly established, intelligence officials still found themselves investigating contrary claims. For modern researchers, these files offer a fascinating glimpse into both intelligence methodology and the persistent nature of Hitler's survival myths. They show how thoroughly American intelligence monitored Nazi movements in South America, even as they occasionally collaborated with former Nazis for Cold War objectives. The Colombian Connection. The Colombian Connection might be the most intriguing piece of the entire Hitler escape puzzle. While most theories remain vague and secondhand, this particular claim stands apart because it came with something most others lacked: a photograph and specific details from someone claiming direct repeated contact with the Führer himself. In 1955, a former SS officer named Philip Citroen approached CIA contacts with an extraordinary story. Citroen claimed to have met with Hitler monthly in the Colombian city of Tunja. He maintained he had established a regular relationship with the Nazi leader, who was living under the pseudonym Adolf Hitler among former German Nazis. Citroen's account was compelling due to its specificity. He detailed Hitler's living conditions and described how the former dictator had adjusted to his new life. According to the report, Hitler appeared older than during the war, consistent with the decade that had passed, but remained recognizable to those familiar with his appearance. The real bombshell was the photographic evidence. An image showing Citroen standing next to a man resembling an aged Adolf Hitler, taken in Tunja in 1954. The photograph shows Citroen alongside an elderly man with Hitler-like features, the familiar facial structure, similar hairline, and comparable stature. For conspiracy theorists, this photograph became their holy grail, tangible evidence seemingly confirming their suspicions. The report described how Hitler had found refuge far from Berlin's ruins, living among sympathizers who protected his identity. Citroen explained that the former Führer was treated with reverence by the small German community who knew his true identity, while maintaining a low profile to avoid detection. This perfectly matched theories that Nazi networks had helped their leader escape and establish a new life abroad. The report gained credibility from the reaction it generated within intelligence circles. Rather than immediate dismissal, it worked its way up the chain of command. Intelligence officers documented the claim in detail, photograph and all. Official documentation gave the story legitimacy most Hitler survival myths lacked. This Colombian connection became central to escape theories. It offered a compelling package: a named witness, a photograph-specific locations, and CIA documentation. Like a desert mirage that appears solid and detailed from a distance, the story had all the elements of a perfect conspiracy: a credible witness with insider access, physical evidence, verifiable details, and official government interest. The timing made it more intriguing. Coming a decade after Hitler's reported death, it aligned with escape theorists' timeline. Hitler slipping away during Berlin's fall, traveling to South America through established escape routes, and settling into obscurity. The Columbia report creates sensation because it differs fundamentally from other claims. This wasn't a random Hitler sighting. This was a former SS officer, someone who would recognize Hitler, claiming regular meetings and providing photographic evidence. However, just as a mirage dissolves upon approach, the bombshell that conspiracy theorists overlook appears in the CIA documents themselves. The very files documenting Citroen's claim contain the agency's assessment, and they were deeply skeptical. The declassified document explicitly states that neither the agent who sent the report nor the one who wrote it is able to assess the authenticity of the information being relayed. This crucial disclaimer appears in the original report, highlighting intelligence community caution regarding these claims. Further investigation led to an even more definitive conclusion. After examining the matter, intelligence officers determined the report was fanciful, not credible. Another declassified document recommended the entire matter should be completely dropped. This wasn't the CIA covering up evidence, it was the CIA investigating and finding nothing substantial. This context fundamentally undermines Hitler's survival theories. The document conspiracy theorists reference as smoking gun evidence contains its own debunking. The CIA took the possibilities seriously enough to investigate and concluded there was nothing to the story. The Colombian Connection reveals how conspiracy theories operate. By focusing exclusively on the report's existence while ignoring the CIA's conclusions about that report, believers maintain their preferred narrative. They point to an official document while disregarding its actual findings. The human cost of such selective interpretation is significant. Embracing these theories diverts attention from documented history and the real suffering of millions under the Nazi regime. It gives false hope to those seeking justice and closure, while diminishing the historical record established through exhaustive investigation. The report wasn't recently discovered. The documents were declassified in 2017 as part of the JFK files release, not by the Argentinian government, as some social media posts claim. Despite these files becoming public years ago, historians maintained their consensus about Hitler's fate. The evidence for his death in Berlin remained far stronger than this discredited Colombian sighting. The CIA's investigation demonstrates something quite different from conspiracy theorists' suggestions. Rather than proving Hitler escaped, it shows American intelligence thoroughly followed up on even unlikely claims about Nazi fugitives. They documented reports, investigated their validity, and reached reasonable conclusions based on the evidence, or lack thereof. Hitler's final hours. As the Soviet Red Army closed in on Berlin during those final desperate days of April 1945, Hitler retreated deep underground into what would become his tomb, the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. The concrete fortress represented the last stand of a defeated tyrant. The psychological transformation of Hitler during these final days reveals the impossibility of escape theories. A mere 5 months earlier, he commanded massive counter-offensives. Now he celebrated his 56th birthday on April 20th in a subterranean bunker, while Soviet artillery shattered the city above. A stark reality that witnesses described as surreal. Intelligence agencies may have chased shadows across South America, but what truly happened in that Berlin bunker tells a very different story than conspiracy theorists suggest. While social media buzzes with supposed CIA revelations about Hitler in Argentina, the overwhelming physical evidence and eyewitness testimony from April 1945 paint a definitive picture of the Nazi leader's final moments, one that's far more conclusive than many realize. By April 30th, Hitler received news that sealed his fate. His personal secretary Traud Junge documented the moment when Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel delivered the message that General Wenck's 12th Army, Hitler's final hope for relief, would not reach Berlin. Upon receiving this crushing update, Hitler reportedly stated, "National Socialism will die with me." This declaration directly contradicts any notion of an elaborate escape plan to continue his ideology elsewhere. What followed was a methodical finale. Hitler and Eva Braun, married hours earlier in a bizarre bunker ceremony, said their farewells to the remaining staff. Multiple witnesses observed these goodbye encounters. The precision of these accounts, specific words exchanged, Hitler's demeanor, event timing, align perfectly across independent testimonies, creating a historical record that conspiracy theories cannot credibly challenge. The record of Hitler's final week shows a man preparing for death, not escape. As Soviet forces tightened their grip on Berlin, his mental state crumbled rapidly. His military briefings became increasingly detached from reality. He moved phantom armies across maps while the actual German military collapsed like a house of cards. Those surrounding Hitler during these last days provided remarkably consistent accounts of his declining mental state and the finality of the situation. Staff members heard the fatal gunshot, and Hitler's valet Heinz Linging first entered the room afterward. Discovering the bodies, Rokas Misch, Hitler's bodyguard, confirmed these details throughout numerous interviews across his lifetime, never deviating from the core facts, even decades later, when revealing an alternate story would have carried no personal cost. This hasty cremation strengthens the historical record through its very imperfection. Had Hitler's staff fabricated a cover story, they would have claimed complete destruction of the remains. Instead, they accurately described a rushed partial cremation that left identifiable remains, precisely what Soviet forces later discovered. The disposal of Hitler's body provides compelling evidence against escape theories, following Hitler's explicit instructions, driven by fear that Soviets would display his body as they had Mussolini's. Staff carried the bodies up emergency exit stairs into the Reich Chancellery garden. There, in a shallow shell crater, they doused the bodies with gasoline and burned them while Soviet shells continued to fall nearby. The Soviet investigation thoroughly undermines conspiracy theories. Soviet authorities conducted extensive interrogations of all surviving bunker personnel over several years. They questioned witnesses separately, searching for inconsistencies, yet found remarkable agreement on key details of Hitler's death and cremation. A conspiracy to fake Hitler's death would have collapsed under such intense and prolonged interrogation. Soviet investigators recovered dental fragments from the exact location described by Hitler's staff. These dental pieces became crucial evidence. Hitler had extensive and unique dental work, and his personal dentist records had been captured. Forensic experts compared these fragments with existing records and confirmed a perfect match. Impossible to falsify in 1945 without modern forensic technology. Modern forensic science has reinforced the historical consensus. In 2018, French scientists analyzed Hitler's teeth fragments preserved in Russian archives. Their research, published in the European Journal of Internal Medicine, confirmed the dental work matched Hitler's records and revealed evidence supporting his known vegetarian diet. While they couldn't definitively determine if Hitler took cyanide before shooting himself, the dental evidence firmly established his identity. Stalin initially promoted the idea that Hitler might have escaped, not because it was true, but because it was politically useful to maintain the specter of Nazism. Soviet officials eventually accepted their own investigators' evidence. After exhaustive investigation, even the CIA's later investigations into alleged Hitler sightings in South America demonstrate thorough intelligence work rather than evidence of his survival, documenting claims, investigating them, and ultimately dismissing them based on the overwhelming evidence of Hitler's death in Berlin. This same research debunked one piece of supposed Hitler evidence. The skull fragment with a bullet hole preserved by Russia was revealed through DNA testing to be female, not male. This finding simply demonstrates that in the chaos of collecting remains from a bomb crater where multiple bodies burned, including Eva Braun's, some misidentification occurred, consistent with a real-world scenario rather than a perfectly executed cover-up. The cumulative weight of evidence, eyewitness accounts, dental records, consistent testimonies, under separate interrogations, and modern forensic analysis, has led to a unanimous conclusion among serious historians. Hitler died by suicide in Berlin on April 5th. Any contrary claim requires dismissing mountains of physical evidence and the testimonies of dozens of witnesses who had every incentive to tell Soviet interrogators what they wanted to hear, that Hitler had escaped. The psychology of conspiracy. The sheer magnitude of Hitler's crimes creates a profound psychological dilemma. When someone orchestrates the systematic murder of millions, their quiet suicide in a bunker feels like an insufficient conclusion, a terrible anticlimax to humanity's darkest chapter. This sense of unresolved justice fuels a deep hunger for a different ending. It's similar to walking out of a movie where the villain simply dies off screen rather than facing true consequences. Our minds crave narrative completion, the fantasy of Hitler living in hiding, looking over his shoulder in fear for decades, satisfies our innate desire for justice in a way that his quick death in Berlin simply cannot. If the evidence for Hitler's death is so conclusive, why do escape theories refuse to die? The persistent belief that Hitler somehow slipped away to Argentina isn't just about missing facts. It's about how our brains process unthinkable evil and unsatisfying endings. The real mystery isn't where Hitler died, but why we're so reluctant to accept the answer historians unanimously provide. This yearning for retribution overrides logical reasoning, compelling otherwise rational people to embrace narratives that contradict mountains of forensic evidence. When confronted with an unsatisfying truth or an emotionally fulfilling fiction, many find the latter irresistible. Hitler escape theories persist because of their dramatic nature. The more elaborate the conspiracy, the more it fulfills our need for a proportional punishment to history's greatest crimes. The Cold War era provided the perfect incubator for these alternative narratives. Post-war society existed in a fog of government secrecy, classified operations, and competing propaganda campaigns. Citizens grew accustomed to questioning official statements and suspecting hidden agendas behind every announcement. When Soviet and American intelligence agencies contradicted each other about basic facts, public skepticism toward any official version of events became natural. This atmosphere of distrust created fertile ground for alternative theories to flourish. Hitler escape theories gained stubborn persistence from the grain of truth at their center. While Hitler himself didn't escape Berlin, thousands of actual Nazi war criminals fled to South America, using sophisticated escape networks. These documented escapes with false identities, Vatican-issued travel documents, and welcoming governments make Hitler following the same path seem plausible. When Josef Mengele successfully hid in South America until his death, and Adolf Eichmann lived openly in Argentina for years, the idea of Hitler escaping seems like a logical extension of established facts. Confirmation bias allows believers to maintain their convictions despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Those inclined to believe in Hitler's survival focus on ambiguous elements, unexplained timeline gaps, witness inconsistencies, or partial remains, while dismissing the substantial evidence confirming his death. This selective processing creates a belief system resistant to contradiction and explains why factual evidence rarely changes minds. For survivors of the Holocaust and their families, these persistent theories can reopen wounds, forcing them to continually confront not only the horror of what happened, but the suggestion that justice was never served. The internet has supercharged these theories, allowing them to spread at unprecedented speeds. Social media platforms create echo chambers, where ideas circulate, unchallenged, reinforced by algorithms that connect users with content matching their existing beliefs. Online communities dedicated to alternative histories provide social validation, making fringe theories feel mainstream rather than marginal. Declassified intelligence documents have inadvertently given these theories an air of institutional legitimacy. When people see CIA memos discussing alleged Hitler sightings in Colombia, many focus solely on the fact that the government investigated at all. If there was nothing to it, the thinking goes, why would the CIA have files about it? This misunderstands how intelligence agencies operate. Recording and investigating even implausible claims is standard procedure. The psychologist Carl Jung once noted that people will believe a lie because they want it to be true or because they are afraid it might be true. This insight captures why Hitler escape theories endure. They serve psychological needs beyond mere historical curiosity. They demonstrate our desire for narrative completion, proportional justice, and our tendency to resist unsatisfying conclusion. These theories exhibit classic patterns of conspiracy thinking, where believers connect unrelated facts into seemingly coherent narratives. A Hitler sighting, a submarine off Argentina, and a German-speaking community in Patagonia become linked in an elaborate escape plot, despite no evidence connecting these elements. This pattern-seeking behavior is fundamental to human cognition, but operates unconstrained by critical evaluation in conspiracy thinking. The irony is that these fictional scenarios distract from the very real Nazi presence in post-war Argentina. The documented escape of thousands of actual war criminals represents a genuine historical scandal, far more consequential than any imagined Hitler sighting. While intelligence agencies investigated phantom Hitler reports, actual Nazi war criminals established new lives with the protection of sympathetic governments. Understanding why these theories persist provides valuable insight into broader patterns of misinformation. The psychological mechanisms driving belief in Hitler's escape: desire for justice, distrust of authority, confirmation bias, and pattern seeking appear in countless other conspiracy theories. By recognizing these patterns, we gain perspective on how misinformation spreads and why presenting facts often fails to change entrenched beliefs. The real Nazi exodus. While Hitler's fictional escape has captured imaginations for decades, the truth about Nazi fugitives in Argentina is far more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. Thousands of actual war criminals, men with blood on their hands, escaped to South America and were welcomed with open arms by a government eager to receive them. Their escape network was so sophisticated that it earned a sinister nickname, the Ratlines. The scale of this mass exodus is staggering. Around 5,000 Nazi war criminals successfully fled to Argentina after World War II, with thousands more spread across neighboring countries like Chile, Paraguay, and Brazil. This was a methodical operation with established routes, documentation factories, and official protection waiting on the other side. These ratlines evolved from scattered escape attempts into two primary routes that became well-oiled machines for Nazi fugitives. The first pathway took escapees from Germany through Spain, then onward to Argentina. The second route ran from Germany to Rome, then to the port of Genoa, where ships carried these criminals to their South American havens. These were mainstream transportation routes hiding fugitives in plain sight. What's particularly shocking is how these escapes were legitimized through official documentation. The International Red Cross became an unwitting accomplice in this massive evasion of justice. The process typically began with a Nazi criminal obtaining false Vatican-issued identity documents, often with the help of sympathetic clergy. These papers, which might list them as stateless refugees with Italian-sounding names, then served as the foundation for acquiring Red Cross passports. These coveted documents featured multiple official stamps, photographs, and signatures that granted international travel privileges to wanted war criminals. The scale of this document fraud was revealed in 2012 when a German legal team examined South American immigration files. They discovered that most Nazis who entered the continent did so using these forged Red Cross passports. Among them were approximately 800 SS members, the very organization responsible for running concentration camps and death squads, who made their way specifically to Argentina under false identities. The political climate under Juan Perón's government explains how these war criminals found such a welcoming reception. Argentina maintained strong cultural and ideological ties with fascist regimes. It was the promised land for escaped Nazis because its leadership actively admired the fascist elements of the Third Reich. The Perón administration's fascination with Nazi Germany extended to their military aesthetics, public displays of power, and their shared anti-Semitism. This was personal for Perón, who had served as an adjunct officer in Mussolini's Italian army during the late 1930s. His government cultivated an environment where Nazi fugitives could thrive. Long before the war ended, Argentina had positioned itself as a safe harbor for Nazi interests. The country served as a hub for Axis spies, with Argentine officers and diplomats holding key positions within Hitler's alliance structure. When these Nazis needed somewhere to run after Germany's defeat, they naturally turned to a country where they already had established connections and sympathizers in government positions. Once in Argentina, these war criminals established new lives under thin veneers of false identities, often settling in communities with strong German influences, where they could speak their native language and maintain aspects of their former culture. Many barely bothered to conceal their pasts among sympathetic neighbors who either shared their ideology or were willing to look the other way. These weren't minor players in the Nazi regime who slipped through the cracks of justice. The Ratlines transported high-ranking officials, concentration camp administrators, and SS officers who had directly participated in mass murder. These were individuals whose names and faces were known to Holocaust survivors, whose crimes were documented in detail, yet they managed to vanish into comfortable new lives across the Atlantic. The establishment of these Nazi enclaves represented a stunning failure of post-war justice. While the Nuremberg trials put a handful of Nazi leaders on the world stage to answer for their crimes, thousands more responsible for implementing the Holocaust simply disappeared. They traded their military uniforms for civilian clothes, adopted Spanish as a second language, and blended into Argentine society, all while Allied nations made minimal efforts to track them down. This systematic protection of war criminals, not Hitler's fictional escape, is the real scandal of post-war Argentina. It represents a coordinated effort involving multiple governments, religious institutions, and international organizations that allowed mass murderers to escape punishment. The Ratlines were an extension of the moral failure that allowed the Holocaust to happen in the first place, the willingness of ordinary institutions to become complicit in extraordinary evil. While conspiracy theorists have spent decades searching for phantom evidence of Hitler in South America, the real Nazis hiding there lived quite openly. They attended local festivals, ran businesses, raised families, and in some cases even maintained contact with former colleagues. They enjoyed the freedom they had denied to millions of innocent victims. These escapees brought wealth stolen from Holocaust victims, technical expertise that benefited their host country's military and industries, and networks of contacts that connected former Nazis across South America. Some even continued promoting anti-Semitic ideology in their new homeland, poisoning a new generation with the same hatred that had devastated Europe. The upcoming declassification of Argentine documents promises to expose not just individual Nazis who found refuge there, but the infrastructure that enabled their escape and protection. These records will likely reveal how banks, government agencies, shipping companies, and diplomatic services collaborated to shield war criminals from justice. The paper trail of this mass evasion may finally provide answers to questions that Holocaust survivors and their families have asked for generations. How did the people who murdered our loved ones simply vanish? The most wanted fugitives. Behind the filing cabinets of declassified documents lies a reality far more disturbing than Hitler conspiracy theories. The men who actually engineered mass murder lived ordinary suburban lives in Argentina. When Israeli intelligence agents finally tracked down Adolf Eichmann in 1960, they didn't find him lurking in shadows or hidden in some remote compound. They found him stepping off a bus on Garibaldi Street in Buenos Aires, returning home from his factory job at Mercedes-Benz. The man who had orchestrated the transportation of millions to death camps was living as Ricardo Clement, an unassuming factory foreman who carefully tended his garden on weekends. Eichmann's story represents the most successful Nazi hunt in history. After escaping Europe through the Ratlines in 1950, he established himself in Argentina's growing German community. For a decade he lived quietly while Mossad painstakingly followed leads to locate him. When they confirmed his identity, agents planned one of history's most audacious capture operations. They snatched Eichmann near his home, kept him in a safe house, and smuggled him out of the country on an El Al flight, disguised as an ill airline crew member. What followed was unprecedented. The architect of the Holocaust facing his victims in a Jerusalem courtroom, behind bulletproof glass, Eichmann listened as survivors described the machinery of death he had built. His defense, that he was just following orders, collapsed under evidence showing his enthusiastic implementation of genocide. The world watched as Israel tried, convicted, and executed one of Hitler's most efficient killers. On June 1, 1962, Eichmann was hanged at Ramla prison, the only person ever executed by the modern state of Israel. Eichmann was merely one of many who found sanctuary in Argentina. In 1949, Josef Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz, arrived. While Eichmann managed transportation logistics, Mengele conducted horrific medical experiments on prisoners, particularly twins. Children would see him on the selection ramp, pointing left or right, determining who would live as test subjects and who would die immediately in the gas chambers. In Argentina, Mengele initially lived openly under his own name, running a carpentry workshop in Buenos Aires. The physician who had injected chemicals into children's eyes was now crafting furniture for Argentine homes. After Eichmann's capture, Mengele fled to Paraguay and then to Brazil, adopting various aliases. For nearly 2 decades, he eluded international manhuns. Ultimately, a stroke while swimming off the Brazilian coast claimed him in 1979. Not justice. His identity remained unknown until forensic testing in 1985 confirmed the Angel of Death had lived his final years as a free man. These cases were far from isolated. SAS Colonel Walter Roth, creator of mobile gas vans that killed at least 97,000 people by carbon monoxide poisoning, found safe haven first in Argentina before moving to Chile. The man who solved the inefficiency of shooting victims by turning delivery trucks into mobile death chambers died peacefully in Santiago, In 1984, despite multiple extradition attempts, Eduard Roschmann, the butcher of Riga, responsible for his sadistic rule over the Latvian ghetto where 35,000 Jews were murdered, fled to Argentina in 1948. When exposed years later, he escaped to Paraguay, dying of a heart attack in 19... No court ever heard testimony from survivors who remembered him shooting children for sport. The chilling aspect of these cases is how they lived afterward. Many made minimal efforts to conceal their identities within sympathetic communities. They attended German cultural events, joined clubs, and socialized openly with fellow expatriates who either didn't know or didn't care about their pasts. Some even used their real names on official documents, relying on Argentina's political climate to shield them from consequences. The upcoming Argentine declassification will likely reveal how extensive this protection network was. These weren't frightened fugitives living in constant fear. They were protected immigrants building new lives with tacit approval from authorities. The documents may finally name the bankers who processed their funds, the immigration officials who stamped their papers despite glaring red flags, and community leaders who welcomed them into society. These stories gain significance when contrasted with Hitler conspiracy theories. While tales of the Führer in South America persist without evidence, the confirmed presence of actual Holocaust architects living normal lives is the genuine scandal. Survivors of Auschwitz potentially walked past Mengele in markets. Families of Eichmann's victims perhaps lived in the same neighborhood as their relative's executioner. Justice eventually found some. Herbert Kukers, the hangman of Riga, responsible for murdering 30,000 Latvian Jews, was tracked to Brazil by Mossad agents who executed him in 1965. Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka and Sobibor death camps, was captured in Brazil in 1967 and extradited to Germany, sentenced to life imprisonment. He died of heart failure in prison in 1971, having admitted his guilt hours before his death. But these successes were exceptions. Most Nazi war criminals who reached South America were never brought to justice. They built businesses, raised families, participated in community activities, and eventually died naturally. Their victims denied even the smallest measure of justice. The declassified documents will likely expose not just individual cases, but the systematic nature of this evasion. They may finally answer how men like Eichmann maintained new identities for so long, or how Mengele secured resources to flee when pursuers drew near. The paper trail will likely reveal banks that handled funds looted from Holocaust victims, corporations that provided employment to recognizable fugitives, and government officials who deliberately looked the other way. These stories represent profound failures of justice that continue to haunt survivors and their descendants. When Eichmann was captured, Holocaust survivor Yael Denor collapsed while testifying at his trial, overwhelmed by facing the man who had sent so many to their deaths. For every Eichmann who faced justice, dozens of perpetrators lived full lives without ever answering for their crimes. Following the money, justice eluded most Nazi fugitives, but their money left a trail that couldn't be erased. The banking records Argentina is about to declassify might finally answer the question that's haunted Holocaust survivors for decades. Not whether Hitler escaped to Argentina, but how thousands of actual war criminals managed to finance their freedom while their victims received nothing. When we talk about Nazi escapes, we often focus on the individuals and their new identities, but a crucial element made these escapes possible: money. Lots of it. Building new lives in South America wasn't cheap. These were war criminals with resources, and the upcoming declassification will focus heavily on the financial networks that enabled their escape and comfortable resettlement. The documents Argentina is releasing contain banking transactions, financial statements, and economic paperwork that will reveal how the Nazi fugitive pipeline operated on a practical level. These records, held by Argentina's defense ministry for decades, offer historians a comprehensive view of the financial infrastructure that allowed thousands of war criminals to vanish from Europe and reappear in South America with the resources to start over. Escaping Europe in 1945 required false identity papers, bribes for officials, transportation across multiple countries, and enough capital to establish yourself in a new country. For most Nazi fugitives, this required substantial funds that often came directly from their victims. The Holocaust was genocide combined with one of the largest organized thefts in human history. Jews and other victims had their homes, businesses, art collections, bank accounts, and even gold fillings systematically stolen. That stolen wealth became the escape fund for many Nazi criminals. Gold, jewelry, art, and other valuables taken from Holocaust victims were converted into the cash that financed new identities and new lives. The expected documents may finally reveal exactly how those assets were moved across continents, laundered through various institutions, and transformed into seemingly legitimate funds that supported thousands of war criminals in their post-war lives. Swiss banks play a particularly critical role in this financial network. Long before these institutions became infamous for holding dormant Holocaust-era accounts, they were actively helping Nazi officials hide and transfer assets. The declassified records are likely to expose precisely how these financial institutions facilitated the movement of stolen wealth out of Europe and into South America. This isn't ancient history or academic curiosity. These financial connections extend into the present day, which is why U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley has been pushing for these documents. His investigation into Credit Suisse and its historical servicing of Nazi-linked accounts directly prompted Argentina's declassification. Grassley is looking at how modern financial institutions handled what amounts to blood money stolen from Holocaust victims. Financial transactions create records that survive decades, like fingerprints at a crime scene, that remain long after the perpetrators have fled. You can change your name, your appearance, and your history, but every transfer, every account opening, every property purchase generated paperwork. That paperwork, hidden for nearly 80 years, could expose entire networks of collaborators across multiple countries. The documents are expected to name names, not just of Nazi fugitives themselves, but of the bankers, government officials, and business people who helped them, who facilitated these transfers. Which banks knowingly handled stolen assets? Which Argentine officials accepted bribes? The financial trail connects everything and everyone, potentially revealing collaborators we've never previously identified. These revelations extend beyond exposing individual bad actors. The financial documents may reveal how government institutions, private banks, and international organizations all played roles in this massive evasion of justice. When thousands of war criminals escaped, it happened through organized, well-funded networks that crossed national boundaries and involved people at the highest levels of various institutions. The Simon Wiesenthal Center has been particularly vocal about the importance of these financial records. Named after history's most famous Nazi hunter, the center has long recognized that tracking money often exposes Nazi criminals and their enablers. Their involvement in pushing for these documents underscores how crucial financial evidence is to understanding the full scope of post-war Nazi escapes. What's particularly disturbing is how these financial connections blur the line between the criminal underworld and respected institutions. The same Swiss bank handling an ordinary citizen's modest savings might simultaneously have been laundering blood money stolen from Holocaust victims. The upcoming documents may reveal these parallel financial worlds, one for ordinary citizens and another for war criminals with stolen assets. The Ratlines, those escape routes that thousands of Nazis used to flee Europe, were financial corridors through which stolen wealth flowed from Europe to South America. The declassified documents may finally expose how these financial ratlines functioned, who operated them, and how they connected to the physical movement of war criminals across continents. For families of Holocaust victims, these financial documents represent something deeply personal. While survivors struggle to rebuild shattered lives with nothing, the architects of their suffering lived comfortably on stolen wealth. The banking records might finally confirm what many have long suspected, that the same assets stolen from victims directly financed the comfortable retirements of their persecutors. Senator Grassley's investigation specifically focuses on how Credit Suisse and other financial institutions handled these morally tainted assets. Did they know they were dealing with stolen wealth? Did they actively help disguise the origins of these funds? Did they continue handling these accounts even after knowing they belonged to war criminals? The declassified documents may finally provide clear answers to these questions that have haunted Holocaust survivors and their descendants for decades. The Vatican Connection. Following the money reveals unexpected connections. But the most shocking Ratline collaborator wasn't wearing a banker's suit. He was wearing a priest's collar. When Franz Stangl, commander of the Treblinka death camp, needed new identity papers after overseeing the murder of nearly 1 million Jews, he didn't turn to forgers in back alleys. He walked through the front door of the Vatican. The unlikely figure at the center of this religious ratline was Bishop Alois Hudal, an Austrian-born Catholic cleric ministering to prisoners of war in Rome. Hudal openly admired Adolf Hitler and felt a duty to help what he considered Catholic refugees escaping Europe's post-war chaos. What makes Hudal's case particularly striking is that he never denied his actions. In fact, he proudly admitted to aiding Nazi war criminals, seeing them as necessary allies against what he perceived as the true enemy, communism. Hudal's operation formed a critical component of the entire Nazi escape network. He provided Vatican-issued identity documents to high-ranking Nazi officials on the run, giving them the paperwork needed for international travel after the war. The sacred institutions meant to offer spiritual sanctuary had transformed into a Trojan horse, concealing those who had orchestrated industrial-scale murder. The Vatican Connection extended beyond one rogue bishop. While there wasn't a formal, centralized program within the Catholic Church dedicated to helping Nazis escape, historians describe the system as a spontaneous cooperation of various religious institutions that gradually developed after World War II. This network included numerous monasteries and churches that served as safe houses along escape routes, providing temporary shelter and logistical support to fugitives on the run. The scope of Bishop Hudal's assistance is illustrated by the case of Franz Stangl. After overseeing the systematic murder of Jews at both Sobibor and Treblinka death camps, Stangl fled to Rome, where Hudal personally arranged his escape documents. With these papers, Stangl traveled first to Syria, before eventually settling in Brazil, where he would spend years working at a Volkswagen plant near Sao Paulo. When finally captured and confronted about his crimes, Stangl never denied his identity or actions, a testament to how confident he felt in his new life, built on papers provided by a Catholic bishop. The motivation behind clergy involvement reveals the complicated moral calculations made in the post-war period. For many Catholic leaders, communism represented an existential threat to the Church, a godless ideology actively persecuting believers behind the Iron Curtain. Some clergy justified helping Nazis by focusing on their anti-communist credentials. As historian Gerald Steinecker notes, they saw these men not as criminals but as soldiers in the fight against Bolshevism, who deserved Christian mercy. The physical infrastructure of the Church became instrumental to the Ratlines. Churches and monasteries dotted across Italy offered Nazi fugitives places to hide, regroup, and plan their next steps. In these sacred spaces, war criminals could temporarily disappear while their travel documents were being arranged, allowing them to evade Allied forces actively hunting them. This fear of communism wasn't limited to lower-ranking clergy. Pope Pius XII's own well-documented concerns about Soviet expansion became a reference point for those working on the Ratlines. Whether the Pope himself actively directed these efforts or simply allowed them to continue is still debated among historians. The recent opening of Vatican archives from this period may eventually answer whether the Pope was manipulated or did he know about people like Josef Mengele receiving church assistance. What made these religious connections so valuable? was the legitimacy they conferred. A recommendation from a bishop carried moral weight that could overcome suspicion. When a Catholic priest vouched for someone's character and background, few questioned further. This religious imprimatur provided cover that no other institution could offer, turning churches and monasteries into crucial way stations on the journey to freedom for those fleeing justice. The geographical layout of the Ratlines followed religious networks. The most common escape route took fugitives through Italy, where the highest concentration of Catholic institutions could be found. The route often ended at Italian ports, where church connections facilitated passage on ships bound for South America. The mechanics of the escape process highlight the Vatican's crucial role. The International Committee of the Red Cross issued approximately 100,000 passports until 1951, many obtained by Nazi fugitives. But to secure these passports, applicants needed initial identification papers, precisely what Catholic clergy provided. Without these church-issued documents, the entire system would have collapsed. The Vatican's involvement wasn't peripheral, it was foundational to the Ratline operation. The Vatican's involvement created a morally confusing situation where religious figures dedicated to spiritual guidance were directly enabling the escape of individuals responsible for humanity's greatest atrocities. This contradiction wasn't lost on some Catholics who questioned these activities, but for those helping on the Ratlines, the theological calculation was clear. Fighting communism outweighed bringing Nazi criminals to justice. The most disturbing aspect of the Vatican Connection is how it normalized assistance to war criminals. When respected religious figures treated Nazi fugitives as political refugees deserving of compassion, it created a moral framework where others could justify similar assistance. The Church's involvement gave the entire Ratline operation a veneer of legitimacy it would have otherwise lacked. What makes the Vatican Connection particularly significant is that it represents an institutional failure rather than just individual moral compromises. While financial institutions might have been motivated by profit in handling Nazi assets, the Church's involvement stemmed from ideological alignment, a belief that despite their crimes, these fugitives deserved protection from communist persecution. This religious collaboration challenges our understanding of institutional complicity. The Church wasn't officially allied with Nazi Germany during the war. Yet in the post-war period, elements within it actively helped Nazi criminals escape justice. This disconnect between stated values and actual behavior reveals how institutions can become compromised, not through official policy, but through the accumulated actions of individual members sharing a common worldview. What the documents will really show. The Vatican Connection was just one piece of a much larger puzzle that Argentina is now ready to complete. Behind President Milei's declassification announcement lies not sensational Hitler conspiracies, but something historians have sought for decades: hard evidence of exactly how Argentina's own institutions systematically processed, protected, and integrated Nazi fugitives after the war. These documents could finally expose the networks of bankers, government officials, and everyday citizens who helped war criminals build new lives while their victims still searched for justice. When these declassified archives finally open, researchers expect to discover the identities of Nazi fugitives who have remained completely unknown until now, men and women who successfully disappeared into Argentine society so completely that they never appeared on any Nazi hunter's radar. Think about that for a moment. While we know the stories of Eichmann and Mengele, how many others established new identities with such seamless precision that they lived and died without ever being connected to their wartime atrocities? The financial records in particular promise to illuminate the mechanics of escape in unprecedented detail. These documents will show precisely how the Ratlines operated as financial corridors, tracking money from European banks through intermediaries and finally into Argentine accounts. This paper trail could connect previously unlinked individuals, revealing how seemingly respectable businessmen, government officials, and everyday citizens collaborated to shelter war criminals. What makes these financial documents so powerful is their cold objectivity. While testimonies can be disputed, and memories can fade, banking transactions create an undeniable record. Each transfer, each account opening, each purchase of property leaves behind documentation that can't be easily explained away. The names on these financial records will likely include the Nazi fugitives themselves and their enablers, bankers at institutions like Banco de la Nación who processed their funds, government officials who approved sus paperwork, and business partners who helped establish new commercial ventures. Most significantly, these records will likely expose how systematic Argentina's approach to Nazi refugees actually was. Was there an official but unwritten policy under Juan Perón's government to welcome these fugitives? Or was the system more ad hoc, depending on individual sympathizers within the government? The declassified Defense Ministry files may finally answer this question, potentially revealing coordination between immigration officials, the banking sector, and security services. For decades, historians have debated the organization level of Argentina's welcome to Nazi fugitives. These documents could settle this question by revealing internal communications between government departments, showing whether there was a coordinated policy or simply a culture of looking the other way. The files will demonstrate how bureaucratic systems can be twisted to serve profoundly unjust ends, a lesson with implications far beyond this specific historical case. The banking records might also reveal previously unknown connections between Nazi wealth and Argentina's post-war economic development. Did funds stolen from Holocaust victims help finance Argentine industries? Were government projects funded with Nazi gold? These questions touch on the profound moral complexity of this history, where stolen wealth may have become thoroughly integrated into the legitimate economy. There's also the question of community complicity. How did ordinary Argentine citizens, particularly in areas with large German immigrant populations like Bariloche, respond to the arrival of these fugitives? Did they knowingly harbor war criminals? Or were they themselves deceived by false identities? The declassified documents may reveal the extent to which local communities actively participated in protecting these individuals. What makes Argentina's declassification efforts so significant is that it represents a nation's willingness to confront one of the darkest chapters in its past. By making these documents available in the country's general archive of the nation, the government is acknowledging that historical transparency serves a purpose beyond academic interest. It's an essential step toward institutional accountability. This mirrors similar initiatives in other countries grappling with difficult historical legacies. Israel's release of documents from the Adolf Eichmann trial helped establish a more complete historical record of the Holocaust, exposing networks of collaborators previously unknown. Argentina's declassification promises similar revelations about how justice was evaded on such a massive scale. The timing of this declassification matters deeply. As the last generation with living memory of World War II passes away, preserving documentary evidence becomes crucial. These archives will serve as enduring proof against those who might attempt to minimize or deny this history in the future. For researchers and Holocaust survivors' families, these documents may provide long-sought answers. While many victims never learned what happened to their persecutors, these records could finally reveal their fates, bringing closure that has been denied for generations. The documents will likely reveal that the escape and integration of Nazi fugitives into Argentine society required the cooperation of multiple systems: banking, immigration, law enforcement, and diplomatic channels, all working together to protect war criminals from justice. This systematic failure extended far beyond any single institution. It required the collaboration of officials across multiple countries, financial institutions willing to handle stolen assets, and communities ready to accept new neighbors without questioning their pasts. The importance of these upcoming revelations lies in exposing the mundane bureaucratic processes through which mass murderers were transformed into ordinary immigrants. The documents will show how systems designed to process immigration papers, transfer funds, and integrate newcomers were repurposed to protect those who should have faced justice. Perhaps most disturbingly, the files may reveal how quickly wartime atrocities were set aside in favor of Cold War pragmatism. As both Western and Soviet blocs scrambled to secure scientific expertise and intelligence assets after World War II, moral compromises were made. Argentina's documents may show how knowledge of Nazi crimes was subordinated to political and economic interests, with devastating consequences for justice. While Hitler conspiracy theories continue to captivate the internet, the upcoming declassification will reveal something far more consequential: the sophisticated machinery that enabled thousands of actual war criminals to escape justice. These documents will expose how the Ratlines functioned as complex financial corridors, revealing transactions that transferred Holocaust victims' stolen wealth into new lives for their killers. They'll illuminate how institutions designed to uphold justice were weaponized to obstruct it. These documents demonstrate how systems can be corrupted when convenience, ideology, or profit take precedence over justice. A warning that remains disturbingly relevant today. Will we heed history's lessons,